We're here at the South Carolina Confederate Relic Room and Military Museum, and one of the things that's really just a continual controversy that's surrounded the city since 1865 is who burned Columbia, what exactly happened on the fateful night of February 17th, 1865. And there are a number of answers as you're going around town, and some of the answers are even here in the museum, but they still invite a lot of controversy. When Sherman started his march through the Carolinas, it was on January 30th of 1865. He had just swept through Georgia, having captured Atlanta, and then had captured Savannah and presented it to Lincoln as a Christmas gift. There was a lot of just kind of confusion within the state of South Carolina about where Sherman was going to head to next. Most people thought he was going to head towards Charleston, but there was some concern he would actually head into the middle of the state towards Columbia or Aiken areas. According to the 1860 census, there were about a little over 8,000 people living in the city. When the war occurs, Columbia, as well as a lot of southern cities, are really just going to be a focal point for people to come to seek food, supplies, find jobs, that type of thing, to try to wait out the war as the men are off on the battle. So the city population actually swells to about 20,000 people. When they start hearing about Sherman and his advance through South Carolina, because they're hearing the stories out of the lower part of the state, they're hearing about the burning, they're getting rumors, they're hearing all these, and really a lot of it is rumors and speculation, but they see the Confederate forces here in town, they can kind of feel off the nervousness of them. There was actually a lot of even rioting that took place before Sherman's troops entered the city by the civilian population that was left. So when Sherman starts out on January 30th, the only real impediment he has is the swamps of South Carolina and the very wet weather that he's encountering. But his troops are hardened, they're veterans at this point. His Corps of Engineers is excellent, so he's able to push through very rapid pace of 10 to 12 miles a day with only some minor skirmishes and some minor fighting along the way. Once that happens, really the gateway is open. Sherman can move into the city about as quickly as he'd like once he can get across the rivers. The Confederates, in order to slow Sherman's advance, have burned the bridges into the city. On the morning of February 16th, DeGrass's Union Battery actually shows up on the West Columbia side of the river where the Gervais Street Bridge is today. There was a historic bridge there as well that had been burned by the Confederates. And from that vantage point, he's really able to look into the city and start shelling some of the key points of interest. One of the places that he first sites his artillery to is the First Presbyterian Church steeple, which is about 7 foot taller at that time than it is today. He also starts aiming his artillery into the State House. The State House at that time did not have a roof on it, so the shells are landing on the interior of the building and then nicking and scraping the outside of the building as well. If you go and visit there today, you'll see bronze stars in and along the outside of the building, and those stars actually mark some of the damage that was caused by the artillery projectiles that were fired at the building. And we actually have one in a case here at the Confederate Relic Room as well that you can come see. When the Union troops start moving through, they're finding a lot of that chaos that I was already talking about. And one of the things that they're also discovering is a number of wagons full of cotton that's been centered in the city. The cotton was a very valuable resource at that time, and Hampton and some of the Confederates did not want that falling into the Union hands. So the original plan was to take the cotton out to some local fields in the country and burn it. They just didn't have time to do that. Sherman's men's advance was way too fast. There is some controversy about whether some of those cotton wagons were set fire in the city by the fleeing Confederates. Hampton did put orders out not to set any of them on fire. There's also some theories that some of them might caught fire from some of the shelling going on, some of just the general looting and destruction that was already starting to occur. And there are mixed accounts. Some of the Union officers and soldiers that come through Columbia do not talk about the cotton being on fire. Others do talk about that cotton being on fire, but by all accounts, the cotton that was in the street and any fires around town, such as that down at the train station, everything was completely put out by mid-afternoon. So there wasn't any fires to speak of throughout the late afternoon and early evening hours. Sometime around 7 o'clock, a number of eyewitnesses talk about 3 signals going up into the night sky. These would have been flare gun type signals. And they said that once those signals went up into the sky, right around that time, between 7 and 8 o'clock, the fires in the city just started rekindling. And there's an enormous amount of debate over whether these were some of the fires that were earlier in the day that they had thought had been put out, and the wind's whipping it up and kicking up some of the ash, and then the fire starts to spread that way, or if it was some sort of signal to start the looting and destruction of the city, because a lot of people just felt it was very coincidental. Of course, it could have been one of the flares themselves that started off a fire in the city as well. So that's one of the main points of controversy. But we do know by 8 o'clock that night, the city is starting to become widely engulfed in flames. What we call Main Street today, which was Richardson Street then, is really the epicenter of a lot of the fires. And when the fires start, one of the other problems that's really fueling this is the drunkenness of the Union soldiers. A lot of the low country planters, the Charleston merchants, had sent their alcohol to the city of Columbia and for safekeeping, and the stockpiles had been looted and raided and freely passed out. And so really there was a total breakdown in the command structure of the Union Army in the city. The soldiers, officers of all grades were drunk on duty, and at that point the fires are going, the looting is going, and there are many accounts of Union soldiers with torches going to different buildings. Some of this was intentional, such as the story with the First Baptist Church of Columbia. According to local history, the Union soldiers came to find First Baptist Church to burn because it was a newly built sanctuary, could seat about 1,000 people. It was the largest structure for that type of seating capacity in the city, and they had initially held the secession convention in December of 1860. This was widely known, and they stopped a man on the streets and asked him where First Baptist Church was located. He pointed down the street at another church building. It ended up being Washington Street Methodist Church, so the Union soldiers went over there to burn it, thinking possibly that it was First Baptist Church. The person that they had actually asked happened to be the sexton or the caretaker of First Baptist Church, and he did not want to see that property destroyed. We do know, according to the pastor at Washington Street Methodist Church at the time, that the soldiers tried 3 times to set fire to the church until they finally were successful at doing it. So it was definitely more of an intentional act. We do know that there were 7 church structures throughout the city of Columbia that were burned that night. Sometime around 3 a.m., the fires start dying down. The wind shifts back towards the burnt district, and so that really kind of pacifies things, and a majority of the night's activities are finished. The next morning, the Union troops come back in with fresh troops that are not inebriated, arrest a lot of the people that had been involved in the drinking and the chaos the night before for simple court-martialing, and they quickly restore order within the city. And the devastation is extremely widespread. Pretty much all of Main Street is gone. About a third of the city, all told, has been destroyed at this point. A little over 2,500 dwellings, which would be houses or businesses with housings attached. The number of, in today's terms, would probably be about $544 million worth of destruction. The Union troops stay in Columbia for a few days and then exit out on February 20th, basically leaving destruction behind them. The civilians are really having to fend for themselves at this point, and really have to pick themselves up literally by the bootstrap and just keep moving forward. There isn't a lot of supplies. There isn't like a Red Cross for them coming in. They're really having to rely on the goodness of others that didn't have their homes and belongings burned, and really come together as a community. And the rebuilding process does start pretty quickly into 1866, and you can see those reconstruction buildings kind of starting to pop back up. The events of February 17th definitely helped to shape the environment. It helped to shape the Columbia stories. It helped to shape the places and the people who lived here. So even though this event occurred almost 150 years ago, it still has shaped the landscape when you come to visit the city, whether it's through the stars that you see on the State House and from the destruction of the Main Street, Richardson Street area, or if you go and you're walking in the Vista and you see the signs about the train station or the Wayside Hospital and its destruction, or the printing press, it's now the grocery store. All these places have been shaped and impacted by those events on February 17th. And so when you come back to the city, you still get to have that kind of the little glimpses back into those events, but you also get to see that Columbia is definitely a city that's moving forward, that has a life of its own, that isn't held back by its past, and instead embraces some of those things and moves forward with a lot of new business and commerce growth, between Fort Jackson and the museum communities and the sporting events. It's definitely a city filled with life to this day.